but in the sphere of entrepreneurship. To shed more light on this topic is our keynote speaker, Katlego Mabusela. Katlego Mabusela, or KG as he is better known, is a seasoned radio broadcaster, entrepreneur, professional speaker, and facilitator. For just shy of a decade, Katlego has worked with hundreds of early-stage entrepreneurs from across South Africa and the diaspora, helping them prepare for and navigate the challenging journey from ideation to scale. In that time, he has observed that more often than not, success or failure come down not to the technical and hard skill sets possessed by the entrepreneur, but rather their soft skills quotient. He insists that businesses are built by people after all, and now more than ever, in a post-pandemic reality, greater effort needs to be made to empower people with the soft skills required to successfully complete such a journey. Katlego.
I want you to go back in time with me. Let's say 10, maybe even 12 years. What would have been happening then? Well, if you're in South Africa, we were excited. This guy called Philip was here. The Soccer World Cup was happening in our country. So the likelihood is if you stepped outside, what you would have seen is an incredible array of colors, most of which were our South African flag. But you would have also felt an energy of potential, of hope, of excitement, because people were excited about the future. You would have likely also heard the Vuvuzela that became world famous thereafter. And so everybody was excited. In fact, so excited that for a second, we all believed our national soccer team could possibly win the World Cup. It wasn't made easier by the fact that Pure Shabalala scored that incredible goal to open the World Cup. But as exciting as that was, I want you to try and imagine something else. A slightly thinner me. I know it's hard to see. I'll put it on TV. It puts on about 10 pounds, isn't it? But a slightly thinner me, sitting in a car in the parking lot of a hotel in Sandton. He's got his hands covering his face and he's sobbing. The unfortunate story of that man sitting in that car is that for him, whilst the world is celebrating, he's actually going through a tremendous amount of pain because I just lost my job. And it wasn't just any job. It's the kind of job that you love telling people about. I'm a radio DJ, I'm a radio DJ. At the time, I'd just been fired from one of the country's biggest radio stations. And so as I sat in this car, you can imagine a lot of questions were coming to mind, but most of them were about avoidance. Perhaps avoiding that moment in itself, but perhaps more importantly, how do I avoid this feeling of pain, this feeling of loss, this feeling of failure? And so that's how my story, my journey, my voyage into this odyssey that is failure begins. I had to figure this thing out. In my head, I wanted to understand, how is it possible that whilst the world celebrates around me, whilst people are lifting trophies, lifting drinks, getting excited, connecting, building, gaining momentum, here I am sitting, going backwards. In fact, how is it that I've just lost everything that I've known for the last couple of years? My name, my identity, my position in society. Is there a way of me avoiding this? How do I avoid failing again? And so I decided that right there and then that I'm going to go on this journey, and I'm going to share with you very honestly that as I started on this journey, I had expectations, like most people. I told myself I'm going to ask some of the most successful people in the world, successful people in this country, in fact, that's where I was going to start, because how do I get to the world, right? I'll start in South Africa. I'm going to ask them and figure out from them, how is it that I can avoid this place that I'm at? Because surely life has to have something more to offer. But I had a couple of expectations, and the first was this, and some of you might have been here before. Right? I expected to go into this process and come out of it with these earth-shattering insights, things that I've never heard before, the kind of things that would make me world famous. You know when you search through Google and a picture comes up and at the bottom is the name of the person who had this great awe-inspiring quote? I thought I'd find things like that. That's the first thing I thought I would find. Second thing I thought I'd find is I'd find superhuman beings. The very kind of humans, when they speak, Music starts to play behind their voice because the things they're saying are so deep and profound, and they're doing this groundbreaking stuff. And so I set off on this journey and I started speaking to initially entrepreneurs, because for me, success has always been around, well, money and business. How do you build a business? How do you build it successfully? But perhaps more importantly, again, that big question, how do you avoid failure? First thing I found was that success, and I mean success at its truest and deepest level, is in fact very human and very humble. Success is not the cover of magazines. It is not what you see when you look at your Instagram, Twitter, or any other social media timeline. But in fact, it is in Metsidi, who for the last 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, has woken up at 3 a.m. every morning, packed the same skaftin with the same magwinya, gone and sat at the same corner, and has served her community at that same level for that time. But through that 2 rand magwinya that she sold, has taken her kids, 1, 2, 3, maybe even 4 of them, through primary school, high school, and all the way through, some of them, to medical school. She wasn't featured on the cover of any magazine. Nobody wrote stories about her. Nobody sang arias about her. Success for her and success through her was very quiet, was very disciplined, but more importantly, was very human. It wasn't the superstar that you see when you put your TV on. It wasn't the superstar that the world has accustomed us and conditioned us to believe you need to be for you in order to be successful. She had nothing else except herself, and she brought that to the table. And we'll explore a little bit of that. So the second thing that I discover on this odyssey of mine is something that really, really shook me. And it shook me because it went back to the one thing I was trying to avoid. I was trying to avoid failure. I was trying to avoid loss. I was not trying to go back to that same pain that I'd experienced. But in fact, what I find out is that success is the byproduct of the very failure, the very loss, the very challenges and pains that I was trying to avoid. That, in fact, it wasn't despite of failure that people succeeded. It was because of it and through it. And so I sat with myself and I said, no, man, something here is not sitting well with me. How did they get through that? How do they move through that failure, that loss? That resulted in many, many years of many, many interviews. And I spoke to entrepreneurs, I spoke to the ordinary man. And just to brag a little, I spoke to some famous people as well. You can list Robert Kiyosaki as one of those people that I had a chat with. Got the chance to sit with the great Les Brown, inspirational speaker of the decade, and ask him how it is that he became who he is. Also got the chance to speak to some people who movies were made about. Some of you might remember that wonderful Will Smith movie, right? The Pursuit of Happiness. The man through whom, or at least on whom that story is based, I got the chance to sit with him and speak to him and ask him, how did you get to where you are? Considering all the odds that had been stacked against you, you seem to have moved through failure and you are here now. And like I said, as much as I expected earth-shattering insights, inspiring quotes, most of the answers they gave me were rather underwhelming. In fact, there are things that I'm sure you know. And so I guess maybe I should prepare you and say that I'm about to share with you 3 of those ideas. But please don't expect these to be earth-shattering insights. But what they are is confirmation of truths that are simple. And through discipline, if we apply these truths, you and I can move from failure to success. We can truly fall, but bounce from those falls and move forward. The world has gone through a difficult time. The world has gone through the COVID pandemic. And with that has come a great deal of loss, whether it's in business, it's in family, it's in our finances, it's in our relationships. We're all trying to recover from this loss. And I guess the big question we should be asking ourselves is, what can we learn from these people? Well, here's what some of them what he said to me. The first thing we need to do, if you and I are going to truly bounce forward, is that we need to expect the impact. I'm going to say that again. We need to expect the impact. What that simply means is this: there is no story that is linear. There's no success story that is linear. It means if you're going to reach beyond what your current reality is and go for something bigger, there is going to be a moment of impact. Whether you control it or not is neither here nor there. Whether it happens to your little world or it happens to the greater community is neither here nor there. COVID was one such moment. So you need to prepare yourself. And what do I mean by that when I say prepare yourself? I think it was the great Mike Tyson, yes, I'm quoting Mike Tyson in a formal, serious presentation, who said that everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. What does that mean for you? It means that you need to know that the impact is coming. You need to get yourself ready for that impact. You need to brace for it. Perhaps more importantly is the second part of this, which is that not only do you need to expect the impact, but you need to make sure that you have the elasticity, like you would imagine a basketball, to be able to absorb that impact. And what does that look like for us as human beings? It means you have to have the capacity to expand and absorb impact, absorb force, but also to be able to release that energy back. And that means internally. I'm talking emotionally, I'm talking psychologically, I am talking intellectually, and I am talking physically. It is incredibly important for you and I to invest in who we are, in our ability to absorb that impact. There's a saying in the Navy SEALs, the American Navy SEALs, that simply says that we do not rise to our expectations, but in fact, what we do is we fall to our level of training. So as you go through life, we are showing up at the level of training or conditioning that we have built ourselves up to. You can have all the dreams in the world, all the hopes and ambitions, but the truth is, when life happens, what will happen is you will go back to default settings. And the question is, what are your default settings? So you work in the selling space. Every day, you're either trying to build your downline, build those relationships, make sure they're strong, support your team, right? Or you're possibly looking to sell product and have new communities, new families, new people have the opportunity to engage not only with the product, but with the possibility of forwarding their dream, building their dream, increasing their dream, changing their reality. You and I both know at this point that that's not an easy exercise. That door is not always going to swing open. Of the 10 times you will knock on that door, 10 and a half of them will be closed in your face. And so you will knock again on the 11th one. But for you to have the capacity to do so means that you have to have built that in. It doesn't just come naturally. So that's the first thing we need to do if we're going to learn how to bounce forward, is we need to expect the impact, brace for that impact, but perhaps more importantly, build the capacity to expand when that impact comes. What's the second thing? The second thing is simply this, that we need to understand and value momentum. Nothing bounces without momentum. Are you getting where I'm going with this? If you are sitting and you're going to let the world scare you out of moving, out of acting, and put yourself in a state of inaction, analysis paralysis as it's called, what's likely to happen is when the impact comes, you will shatter because the impact will come. But if you are in motion, you are able to harness that motion. You are able to use your expansive capacity that you've now built in, whether emotional, intellectual, spiritual, and or otherwise, and take that and let that move you from the position you're in to the next position. There's power in momentum. Third thing I want to share is this. One of the common denominators amongst all the people that I spoke to around this idea of how you move through pain, how you move through loss, is that all of them without fail echoed this sentiment. Different words, different language in different times and in different places. They all said the same thing though, which is that you need to use your point of impact. What do I mean by that? Too often when we lose things, what we do is we are shamed, or at least we're shamed into paralysis. So we become too afraid, too embarrassed to deal with the reality of the situation as it is. Now, imagine as a business owner that you're faced with challenges, but you're making the decisions around how to solve those challenges from an alternative reality. I think it's Donald Trump who quoted, or at least came up with this idea of an alternate, reality or truth, something like that. Anyway, the point is, you need to deal with the facts as they are. Because if you're dealing with the facts as they are, you do a number of things. The first thing is this, is that you're not operating from a place of disillusion, right? That's the first thing. So you're not confused, you're working with facts as they are, and so you're able to solve the problem that is in front of you. But perhaps more importantly, when you do deal with the facts as they are, you give permission to those around you to rally around you because they see the reality of what's truly going on. We've given a lot of power to this idea of shame. And often, more often than not, shame is the very reason that people do not do the things that they ought to be doing. because we're afraid that if we fail yet again, who will we be then? So use that point of impact. Take everything there is to take from that moment of impact. And here's the beautiful thing about dealing with the reality of the facts in the moment of impact as well. When you do that, another thing that we negate is that in doing so, you become incredibly resourceful because the noise starts to shut off around you. You start to focus on what your true reality is. And once you do that, you tap into what is available as opposed to what is not there. And so as we wrap, I want to just remind you of these three basic concepts that, like I said, are not earth-shattering insights that are going to be quoted and put on Instagram and some amazing things are going to happen from that, but are simple and useful and very deliberate tools that if you and I use, we can really move from what are supposed to be moments of loss, supposed to be moments of failure, like COVID, where the world shuts down for 2 years, 2.5 years in some parts of the world, where we can't trade, we can't engage with each other, we can't build human-to-human interaction, especially in a selling environment, right? We don't have the opportunity to build that trust and that rapport with potential customers or potential team members that we're trying to lead. What do we do then? Well, we go back to the basics. We remember that we expected this impact. So we're not surprised by the fact that it has happened. We're not the first, we're not the last. This is not the first, it will not be the last. But what we will do is we'll build in the capacity, the ability to absorb that impact that we're going through. Number two is that you and I need to remember that we need to build up momentum. Momentum is incredibly important because when you take momentum and you put it together with our capacity to expand, to absorb energy and to release it, what you will find is we won't shatter, but we will move and bounce to the next thing. Number three is simply this, that you and I need to use that moment of impact. We need to be honest about where we are and deal with the reality as it is. We need to cut away the noise. And sometimes the noise is in the form of people. There are people around you right now who form part of the noise belt that surrounds you. And sometimes what we need to do is put distance between ourselves and them. I think it's Sidney Poitier who said that, I think he wrote a book called The Measure of a Man. And in that book, some of you might be very well aware of how he speaks about this idea that we're the sum total of the company we keep, right? So when two or more men take a walk, one of two things happens. Either the person who's walking ahead slows down for the person who's behind, or the person who's behind walks faster to catch up with the person who's walking in front. Some of us right now are trying to rebuild our businesses in a post-COVID environment, and we're still hanging out with people or spending time and investing in people and relationships that are holding us back. Your reality right now, your point and moment of impact is one that requires that you be focused, that you be present, that you walk with those who see the same vision that you have. And if we do just some of those things, just some of those three things, and we do them in a disciplined way, maybe you and I will get to tell the story of how once upon a time we were sitting in what might be our little car in our little parking lot with our hands covering our face out of embarrassment and tears and pain, and how we moved from that loss to building a successful business, to building a successful network, to fending for our families and really changing the reality that they're facing. Thank you for your time.